Welcome back to another session on Frog Talk. Today, we're exploring a topic that most executives avoid discussing but desperately need to address: how personal relationship challenges directly impact leadership effectiveness and organizational performance. I am joined by Katarina Polonska, a science-backed relationship strategist and behavioral scientist with a master's from Oxford University. As founder of the Successfully in Love method and former regional VP at behavioral science firm Mind Gym, Katarina specializes in helping C-suite executives and founders break through the emotional dysfunction that's sabotaging both their relationships and their leadership. Welcome, Katarina.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very excited to have you on the show. I've been looking forward to this since we connected. And really, I just want to start with your journey. How did you even get to this particular space? Because I have a lot of sort of interest in it myself and fascination. I'm just curious how you even landed on it.
So it's been a long and winding road. If I was to summarize it, there really was an avenue in that was academic, professional, personal, familial, the whole shebang. But very high level, I come from a very high achieving family. Both of my parents are academics and PhDs. And my father actually went on to also become a coach later in his life. And I saw my parents go through a horrible divorce when I was in my early 20s. And I remember at that point, not only was it something that I kind of saw coming because there were red flags in the relationship that I was picking up on as a little child. I mean, children pick up on these things. But when I began to see how the legal system were not supporting an amicable breakup, and really how the lawyers were going to leave them both broke and basically having killed each other, I was pretty horrified by the whole thing. I'd always dreaded divorce. I mean, it was such a kind of a taboo idea back then. You know, are you a child of divorced parents? Like, my goodness. And I remember at the time I was 22 and I was actually building my own first startup. And I really leaned in to try to help them navigate that divorce. I was on good speaking terms with both of them and ended up essentially mediating that divorce. And that was a really traumatizing yet interesting experience to go through of how do we actually resolve this in the most amicable way. And it was, relatively peaceful. I think the whole divorce actually cost them about $500. Like, it wasn't much. Obviously there were finances intertwined and exchanges. And so kind of the backstory to all of that is that my father's always been, very ambitious, traveling a lot, making money for the family. That's really what led to the divorce in the first place. He was very unhappy living alone. He was living alone in Syria for a long time. He was living alone in Russia. Like, he was traveling a lot and again, really suffering and feeling that loneliness that I see so much in the people that I work with. And my mother was also feeling alone because she's at home raising the kids. And there was this kind of narrative that, we're doing it to put money on the table for the family. We're doing it for the kids and the opportunities. And that's great. I'm very privileged. Of course I am. I went to a great girls' school. I got to grow up in the UK. Like, I had a lot of privileges. And at the same time, it did lead to this breakdown of their relationship. It also meant that as a child, I had anorexia growing up because guess what? Abandonment issues. My father's not home. Right. My brother grew up with a lot of depression and angst because guess what? No father figure. So I saw this whole kind of turmoil happening in the family. And my own personal turmoil after navigating that divorce was that I had a nervous breakdown, as one would expect from, a young woman in her 20s. I ended up doing a lot of healing. So because my father at this point was very much in the coaching space, I was very lucky to get a lot of direction into what to do, how to do it, when to do it. So even when I was as young as 17, I was actually doing my NLP practitioner, my hypnotherapy training. I was accruing all of these different qualifications because the philosophy in my family, guess what, academics, was teach yourself. Teach yourself and apply it to yourself. Don't pay for a practitioner, teach yourself and do it. So, at the time it was challenging, but now in retrospect, I'm incredibly grateful because I have all these qualifications. So I really began to go hard on the healing aspect because I knew that obviously I had issues, right? So did a lot of retreats, trained to become a mindfulness teacher, did a lot of therapy, and really went knee deep into this world of psychology and self-help. And then in my late 20s, time has come, time to find a partner, settle down, have kids, went on Bumble, met my ex-fiance. And that's really when kind of the shit hit the fan, if I'm going to be honest. Because at this point, I thought, I'm healed. I'm good. I've done pretty much every therapy out there. I was already working in behavioral science. I literally had done therapy for like 15 years. I'd overcome anorexia twice because it came back when I was at Oxford doing my master's. And I did my master's studying men and women, studying masculinity and femininity, because again, I was so perpetually fascinated by relationships. And I actually found dating really challenging in my 20s. I found the whole dating landscape quite hard. So by the time that I was 28 and ready to settle down, I thought, I've made it. I know what I'm doing here. I'm good. And I was not, because as soon as I got into that engagement, as soon as things got really serious and things got really real, and I'd been in serious relationships before, but there was something different about kind of having that wedding looming. So much anxiety came up, so much self-doubt, so much kind of mistrust. And the relationship was not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. Like, we were fundamentally not compatible. And a lot of things happened that led to its demise. But when I ended up calling off that engagement, which was a harrowing, challenging thing for me to do, right? Coming from a very type A background,
Right.
Perfectionism 101. God forbid I call off an engagement and shame myself and the family and uninvite all of these guests. And I've got this wedding dress hanging in my room. Like, oh my goodness, I wanted kids. I was in my 30s at the time. What the heck do I do? It was the most humbling experience. And the irony was, here I am, VP at a behavioral science firm, doing, a lot of psychology every single day. And I'm calling off my own engagement. And I can't even talk about it in the office because of the shame and the humiliation. And frankly, we have a corporate job to do and I need to get on with it. So that's when I ended up actually, I left the country, moved back to the UK. I was living in Canada at the time, and decided to go really hard on figuring this out, because I didn't want to spend forever going back onto Bumble. I didn't want to, be a single woman into my 40s and 50s. I didn't want to die alone, but I also didn't want to go through these mistakes again. And I was very lucky that by working in behavioral science, I did have access to a lot of great resources. So I essentially made it my job to do my own kind of self PhD, I guess, in relationships. I studied a lot of attachment theory. I really got to understand the anxious attachment style that I now know that I had. I went back to my NLP training, my hypnotherapy. I was doing self-hypnosis. I was really understanding the subconscious mind and blocks and this whole process. And guess what? Lo and behold, 11 months in, I meet my husband. And at that point, I decided I've had enough of corporate. I am going to exit. I'm going to take a sabbatical, take a break. My sabbatical ended up not being a sabbatical at all. It ended up me kind of going even deeper into this world and then starting a business, as I think every type A does when they have a sabbatical. You can't rest. And here I am, years later. It evolved from being very kind of traditional coaching. I was too scared to go into the relationship space because, again, God forbid the shame. And then I realized, you know what? I'm not alone in this. I started out by coaching a lot of my peers at Oxford. By this point, they were doing their PhDs and stuff. And I realized, oh, this is why everyone's anxious. This is why everyone's depressed. It's not the workload. It's not, quote unquote burnout. It's because they're all emotionally dysregulated. Their nervous systems are in tatters, and they're all either miserable and single or in a relationship and miserable. But it's actually the relationship with themselves and the relationship with others that is contributing to all these problems. And so that's what really made me double down and recognize that actually my situation was not an anomaly. This is actually more of the norm. And here I am. I've kind of, I guess, I still work with young people, but the majority of the people I work with are in their 40s and 50s, some in their 60s. And I help them become securely attached, heal their nervous system, and ultimately, simply put, fix their relationships, fix their marriage, fix their love life.
40 minutes is not going to be enough.
I know. Oh, you'll have to have me back.
Oh, man. Okay. I'm going to go off script, definitely, because there's just so much to unpack there. First of all, thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate the vulnerability and the context. A lot of what you said resonates with me because I also come from a high achieving family, and I grew up traveling every 3 years overseas. I was in Indonesia, the UAE, and France before I was 18. I was born in the States. So, I always say that I've basically gone through an identity crisis my entire life because it's just between language barriers, culture shock, and so on. And when you're a kid, culture shock isn't really a thing because you just kind of it's just like, this is just what it is. Everything is different, and that's the norm. And so, yeah, that upbringing definitely resonated with me. My parents did not divorce, but that didn't rid them of basically all the contention that exists even today. So, um, yeah, again, thank you for that context. So when did you actually start this business, this particular endeavor? How long ago was that?
Officially 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, officially. I'd been doing a lot of coaching before. I mean, I've actually technically been coaching since 2007, so a very long time, but it
Hmm.
was very
Yeah.
informal. I had my first coaching business starting in 2007, and it had a different angle, right? But what I realized was that I've been coaching pretty much this whole time. I've always been so fascinated by relationships. It was actually my first business coach. She told me, she said, what's the one topic that you can talk about 24/7 and you just never get bored by and you
Yeah.
don't get depressed by? Because I can talk about things like climate change and all of that stuff, but I get very depressed. I get very sad. So let's not talk about that. And actually, I did before I went into behavioral science, I was working in humanitarian aid. So I was working with a lot of refugees and Syrian refugees.
Got
And
it.
again, I could
Yeah.
talk about that forever, but I will burn out and I'll get very, very depressed.
Yeah.
Um, I feel very strongly for people and the state of the world. And I fully believe, kind of as a side piece, when people heal themselves, as cliche as it sounds, and become securely attached and, regulate their nervous systems, I do believe that the world will become a better place. I think that consciousness will become elevated. I do not see war being on the agenda of someone who is very secure and full of self-love and has healthy relationships. For what purpose? Right? For what purpose? Same thing with, destroying the planet or not caring about animals, not caring about community. Why would you do that if you have a healthy relationship with yourself and healthy relationships with others? You just wouldn't. So I kind of realized that my career in the humanitarian aid space was directly leading to me becoming depressed. I was also single for 5 years when I did it because I just didn't have the stamina to actually, love anyone else truly. Like it was, I was crying every day. It was hard. Um, and so I realized that maybe this relationship angle, not only can I hopefully eventually do some serious philanthropy down the road, but the actual kind of ripple effect is quite beneficial. And ultimately, by working with, smart, high achieving people who ultimately do hopefully get into positions of power, because if you're smart, I think you have every right to go up there and try to fix the world's problems. But let's do it from that secure, healthy, regulated space, right? That's again my theory.
No, I'm smiling because it's crazy how in tune our philosophies are. We're going at it in different angles, but it's rooted in the same thing. My culture brand program is actually my big statement is that it's a stepping stone to world peace, because it's rooted in making humanity harmonious by lifting our relationship with the workplace, and that's all rooted in healthy work environments. And if the workplace is a microcosm for society, then why can't the workplace and an organization be a call it a stepping testing ground for creating a template that can then permeate communities and societies and so on, and be replicated and duplicated and essentially become the norm. And that one's rooted in just joy and feeling contributing, like you're part of something. You feel acknowledged, you feel valued, in a way that makes you want to contribute even more. And in a world where we've created something that's going to evolve so much faster than we ever could, we're on the brink of wiping ourselves out if we're not careful right now. And in the next 10 years is going to be sort of a pinnacle turning point in the human evolution. And my whole thing is reclaiming our humanity through programs like mine and what you're describing.
Yeah.
And essentially, I say the exact same thing you said. I'm like, I don't understand. War just makes no sense anymore. It makes absolutely no sense.
It's
There's
2025. What are we doing? right?
there's so much abundance. It doesn't even make sense. Like there's so
Absolutely.
many resources,
Absolutely.
there's so much abundance. It can actually be split. I'm not saying suddenly spread the wealth because the world would implode. People aren't
Yeah.
trained or
Yeah.
understand what to even do with that. But it would, there's no reason for it. There's no lack of resources or
Yes.
anything like that. And in
Yeah.
fact, the only thing that's threatening us at this point, other than our own archaic animal instincts that haven't changed in 6,000 years or 300,000 years, depending on when you start, is the machine. It's only our own creation.
Mhm.
So, yeah, definitely
100%.
with you there.
Yeah.
um,
100%.
so, I'm curious when your clients, are they, so how do they find you? Like, how are they like, this is what I need?
Yeah.
How does that
Yeah.
happen?
So LinkedIn is kind of my
Yeah.
main platform, but it's quite interesting, right? Because I've done couples counseling a number of times in my life, and I don't do the traditional couples counseling. I've got an institute trained, so I'm absolutely informed by a lot of the mechanisms and the tools. And at times, maybe once out of 10 cases, I do bring both parties together, and we do that work. The real thing that I think I love so much about my work and what a lot of executives are looking for is I firmly believe, and I see this in my work every single day, that you can fix your relationship without having to drag your partner into it. And what I mean by that is humans attune to each other, right? If I show up right now and I started screaming at you and calling you names, you probably are going to react, accordingly back to me, right? If I start singing your praises, you're probably going to respond accordingly. We respond to each other. A relationship is a two-way street. And so if you have two people and they come into the counselor's office and they are both not only being performative because there's a third person there that they don't know and they're watching, they know they're being judged, right? So let's all be honest here. Everyone's performing, being on their best behavior, and they've got their own internal triggers. And you're trying to get them to talk to each other with their triggers flaring up. You're not going to get very far because everyone's thinking about how am I going to look? What am I going to say? How am I going to sound? How am I going to get judged? It's not that effective. So because we know that 95 to 97% of what runs our reality, what creates our reality, is subconscious, meaning the bulk of what's happening in your relationship is subconscious. It's not something you can consciously think about. Does it not follow that it makes much more sense to work on that individually, identify what's going on subconsciously, identify the patterns, identify the blocks? Let's clear them, let's resolve them, let's process them, let's work through them in your own safety, time, and space, away from your partner, to let whatever needs to come up and ground and heal and regulate and become as secure as possible. And then, if even necessary, we bring you two together. What I often find is that it's not even necessary to bring your partner, because guess what? When you come to me and you start healing through your blocks and working through them, which doesn't have to take long, it can be as fast as 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and it's more than enough time to work through a lot of this stuff because I do so much of the subconscious mind work. Again, I'm a hypnotherapist, I have NLP training. There's a lot of other tools that I have up my sleeve, somatic work, IFS, whatever. If you clear all of this stuff up, then you are going to respond. You're going to behave very differently with your partner. The
Yeah.
energy that you bring to the relationship is going to be very different. You are going to be much calmer, much more secure. Your conversation is going to be much clearer. Your communication is going to be better. You're going to be able to articulate yourself, your needs, your boundaries. You are going to be different. And when you elevate yourself, you elevate the standards for the
Yeah.
relationship, and you ultimately inspire your partner to step up as well. And I see all the time that the partner will often go off and do their own work. Sometimes they will come and work with me, right? Because they say to their partner, what's going on with you? You're being really weird. You're being very different. Like, we haven't had an argument in 6 weeks. What's going on? And that's when they say, well, actually, you know what? I've been working with a relationship coach, and, here's who she is. And at this point, there isn't any kind of fear or threat because they're being better. Right. They're being more committed. And at that point, they might want to work with me as well. And then we have this wonderful dynamic where I work with the two of them separately and then bring them together. And that's my favorite dynamic. It's absolutely just such a delight. I'm so lucky I get to do this. It's just joy all around. But very often the other partner is like, okay, well, let me go and do my own work. Let me educate myself, right? Let me go and find my own teacher, my own coach, whatever it might be. And they might grow in a different way, but they're still growing. They're still leveling up. And then you can learn from each other. And it's just, again, it's this wonderful synergy. And so I see that happening all the time. What does also happen, not very often, but it can happen, is that the other partner sees this new version of themselves, of their spouse or partner, whatever it is, and they don't like it. Because actually the relationship was built on a trauma bond. It was built on a lot of argument, a lot of conflict, a lot of toxicity, quite frankly. I know that word is thrown around, but I'm using it. And they don't like what they're seeing. There's none of that charge, right? So they might poke and try to provoke and try to get more of that conflict. And the other partner's not giving them the conflict. And then they might cheat or they might do something even more drastic to test, right? At that point, it becomes pretty clear that this person isn't really that interested in growing and evolving. And especially if you suggest, why don't we work with a coach and they don't want to, then I think the writing's on the wall. But at this point, my argument is always, isn't it better to find this out 2 or 3 months in rather than dragging this out for years and then finding this out when you're older and it's harder to date again? And it's worse, right? And all the studies show children who have divorced parents later in life typically want their parents to have got divorced earlier in life because they sense it. They sense it. The same way I sensed it, the same way other kids sense it. They know that something's off. And the model of relationships that they grew up with isn't a healthy model. So guess what? They're probably going to have more unhealthy relationships. The best thing you can do for your kids if you're unhappy in your relationship is to work on it. And if it's not salvageable, then do your best to have the most amicable and peaceful separation that you can do when they're young, when they're vulnerable enough that they're going to get cocooned in love, protection, safety. Because when they're older, the kid is going to start to feel even more responsible, have to pick up more of the pieces, and there's more of a burden on them, right? And so this idea of, we're staying together for the kids, it's actually not very effective. It's kind of an avoidance mechanism, right? Don't do it. The kids know. They're not stupid. They're sensing it. And you are imprinting on them the model for relationships that they're then going to follow and have to do a hell of a lot of therapy and coaching to untangle themselves from. So role model, you being a happy person as a parent is the most important thing that your kids can see. Being happy, setting boundaries, having good conflict, articulating your needs, being assertive, all of these things are really wonderful things to role model, but burying your head in the sand is not healthy.
I agree with that. Again, so much to unpack. Like the first thing you said, um, working on yourself first, as opposed to trying to work things out together first. I agree with that wholeheartedly. It just goes back to the notion that if you aren't well, if you are carrying so much baggage, if you are carrying all kinds of insecurities and PTSD and so on that you haven't dealt with, and the typical response is usually like people smile away abandonment issues, and they smile away all kinds of parental issues and all this stuff, and then they go into relationships, and every relationship has the same issues and the same problems. And i've been in relationships where I've been with that kind of person, and then I've seen their own track record, and I'm like, you need to just stop seeing people after me. Like, you need to figure your shit out. And it's not like in from a place of animosity. I'm like, for everybody's sake, like for your future partners, for yourself, for everyone, like, just go figure this out, because it's not fair, and it becomes like not fair to anyone. So I agree with that. And I think, and to your point, when you said it lifts up the partner to feel inspired to want to also improve and grow and evolve, that also resonated with me, because again, it speaks to what I do at the organizational level. So it's interesting that how, like, the root of what you're talking about is the root of overall development and collective development as well. So I really see the ties into what your big vision is. And so let's pivot into the workspace a little bit. So you work with executives who feel trapped, unsupported, and disconnected in their relationships. And this is what I was alluding to a little bit earlier, when they're like, when executives think this is what I need, is it coming from a place of I need this personally for my relationship, or are they already aware that their relationship is impacting how they're showing up as leaders in their workplace?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends. I absolutely get some people who come to me and they're like, I can't focus at work because my phone is blowing up because my wife is sending me angry texts. And this happens a lot. And we're in conflict all the time. And I can't sleep. And I have to sleep in another room. And the other room doesn't, it's not the ideal setup and blah, blah, blah. Like it can absolutely affect your focus. Some people don't realize how much it affects their focus. And they come to me more of this is a really common thing I get, super common, far more common actually than I thought, is I'm in love with a coworker or I'm having an affair with a coworker, right? Because I'm an ambitious professional. I spend most of my time in the office. Going home is a nightmare because all I do is have conflict with my partner, and I try to avoid it. And even after dinner, I might go back to the office or I might kind of go up to my study room, and I consciously trying to avoid them, or consciously or unconsciously. And yeah, this other coworker or this other person I feel really good about. I look forward to their messages. They treat me really well. We have the same intellectual curiosity together. We share the same passions. We have a lot more in common than this partner who's basically just a co-parent at this point. And I have nothing really to talk about with them other than logistics about the kids, right? And so that's a really common dynamic. And typically what I'll see is that there comes a kind of a tipping point in that dynamic. It could have been, they realize they've got feelings. It could be that they've actually slept with this coworker. It could be whatever. And they realize, shit, I'm playing with fire. And guess what? Most people don't have a prenup. Most people don't have a prenup, right? So if you're the breadwinner, if you're a successful business owner, the consequences are pretty significant, right? So typically what I'll get is help me wrap this up and help me fix my marriage because I don't want to have to go through the whole stress, and help me find my partner attractive again and help me feel better with them, which funnily enough, I love that challenge. I love that challenge because I'm such a firm believer in the idea that it's really easy to fall, quote unquote, in love. You're not in love, let's be honest. It's really easy to develop an infatuation with someone who is immaculately dressed at the office or, a friend who you don't have any baggage with. It's very rarely about that person. It's almost always about your own internal blocks around intimacy, around worthiness, around feeling safe, around trusting, around whatever the wound, the kind of the core wound might be. But it's about that. And quite frankly, even if you were to leave your spouse and run off with this other person, same thing's going to happen. So, and statistically, we know that the more divorces you have, the greater the odds of having another divorce, until eventually, I think if you have 4 divorces or so, it's like 70% odds of having a divorce. Like, really? Sometimes I run into these women who have had 4 or 5 divorces and they're like multimillionaires. And I'm thinking, well, you have played the game really well, lady. Like, well done, fair play to you. But look at the guys, right? Because again, no one's got a prenup these days. So all of that to say, the stakes are really high, and there comes this point of I need to fix this, and that's when often I come in. Again, I post very regularly on LinkedIn. Obviously, I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, but LinkedIn's kind of my main platform because that's where most of my people live. And and I'll often get this message of, I'm a little bit ashamed to say, can you help me? I don't want to talk about this on LinkedIn. It's a platform.
Yeah.
And
sure.
Totally get that. But then, this is kind of the story that I hear so often. Oh, and sometimes there isn't infidelity. Sometimes it's just, I don't find my partner attractive, or I find them annoying, or there's some kind of like disgruntlement with a partner. But what I do know is that, if you've been with your partner for over 2 years, it's very rarely about the partner. Unless there's like obviously emotional domestic abuse. That's a whole different kettle of fish. And I do get that as well. I do get that as well. But that's a different story. I'm saying kind of if the love has quote unquote faded, then from where I'm standing, it's absolutely salvageable. But you have to do the inner work. You have to do the inner work. And a couples counseling isn't going to save you, nor is therapy, quite frankly. You need to do the subconscious work.
And your clients are they like regularly executive level, C-suite individuals, or are they sort of across the board?
Across the board, yeah. I'd say it's probably 70% execs. Obviously, it's like, VPs of large companies, whether it's Amazon or a global bank, whatever it might be. I do have some younger clients. I think my youngest client's actually 21, and I have a couple of folks in their 30s. Often they are single, or they're tired of dating the wrong people, and they want
Right.
help in finding love. So that's kind of another thing that I do. It's the same process. Identify the subconscious blocks, clear them out, heal your fear of intimacy, which I would argue most people right now in this present day and age have a fear of intimacy. We live in a very avoidant consumerist culture.
Sure.
And
Especially in the West. Yeah.
100%, right? And so
Yeah.
you need to clear that if you want to find healthy love. And again, I honestly think dating apps have destroyed a lot of the dating landscape from a healthy perspective. So much to say on that. Not to say that they can't work. Absolutely, they can work. They should be part of a dating strategy, but it's part of a strategy, and there's a lot of pitfalls with them. And especially from a psychological and emotional lens, there's been a lot of damage done. But
Yeah.
again, all that
I
to
mean,
say,
it's in a
mhm.
in a phrase, it's window shopping.
Oh yes,
It's like
yeah,
it's just
yeah.
become so superficial.
hmm And people lie. People lie, right? People lie all the time on apps, and there's this kind of illusion of choice and abundance. And yes, the world is abundant, but when it comes to partnership, you want the abundance to not get too down and despairing about not finding a partner. But there also has to come a point, and I say this to all my single clients, there comes a point where you have to feel good enough within yourself to know that the choice that you make is also good enough, because no one's going to be perfect. No one's going to be perfect. And I've never met anyone who walks down the aisle on their wedding day and is 1000% sure it's the right person. It's also a little slither of like, that's normal. That's culturally conditioned, I would argue. Right. So I do work with single people and I help them find love and kind of dismantle a lot of this conditioning that's keeping them stuck. And again, guess what? It's a lot of subconscious work.
Taking that theory and connecting it to the leaders that you coach, people who are in positions of power, of authority, of influence, decision makers, and so on. When they're stressed at home in their relationships, in their personal life, especially when they have families, it gets even more stressful. That also statistically has an impact on their team, on the people that they're managing and they're leading, and so on. How you talk when you talk about like personal wellness, taking care of oneself first, get your thought process into gear, and so on. You mentioned that leaders can't create psychological safety
hmm
for their teams if they don't feel psychologically sound.
Yeah.
So um, can you either share stories or elaborate on that concept and how that specifically can impact a team
Yeah.
and a
Yeah.
team's motivation, their productivity, potentially even their desire to stay?
Absolutely. 100%. So I find this stuff really interesting, and I'm doing more and more of it in my work. So also my background's in working with companies, right? Working with corporates, kind of working with individuals is more of a recent
Hmm.
phenomenon in my career. The individuals are the ones in the companies. And if you are trying to scale a company, if you are a senior leader, and statistically, the bulk of the population is actually insecurely attached and pretty dysregulated, because again, we live in a very dysregulated world, you can only imagine the amount of drama, the amount of trust issues, the amount of dysregulation, the amount of activity coming from that unhealthy, wounded place, overworking, micromanaging, stressing about everything, like lying about things. A lot of people lie at work, right? Hiding your work,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. There's so many different, not wanting to come to the office, not wanting to have conflict, not wanting to speak up. So many patterns that can show up that are coming from that, again, subconscious blocks, from that wounded place that so many people have. And so some of the work that I do, probably 30% of my work, is actually working with companies, whether it's a large global bank, which I've worked with a few of those, or insurance companies, whatever it might be, startups, and really going into the leadership teams and helping them through the same process, just without so much of the relationship kind of angle, but helping them identify, what is your attachment style? What are your main patterns? What are your main blocks? What are your main limiting beliefs? And how can we actually use subconscious mind reprogramming? How can I teach you to do that with yourself so that you don't frankly need me in the future? Because I don't want to spend my life in corporations doing this work. I want to teach people and move on. But how can you apply this to yourself and start building this rhythm where you are constantly kind of clearing the unhelpful patterns? And I see it so much. The last project that I did, was working with a global investment bank. And the problem that they had was that they have a ton of really smart people, smart, hungry, ambitious, talented people, millennials, who are all really eager to succeed, working really hard. But guess what? They're burning out. They have really bad boundaries. They're overpromising. Then they're under-delivering because they can't keep up with the promises. They're all extremely anxious. There's a lot of kind of sickness going around because their immune systems are down. There's a high attrition rate because people can't keep up with the pace of work. There's a real sense of fear. Everyone's afraid of getting laid off. There's no trust. There's kind of backstabbing. Horrible environment to be in. Right. And we know that the cost of attrition is extremely high, and it's just not a productive way to build your business. And also innovation's terrible in an environment like that, because if there's no psychological safety, you can't possibly innovate. Google did the biggest project on high performance to date, right, in kind of the history of corporate work. And it was that Project Aristotle. And they found that psychological safety is the number one marker of having high performing teams. And what is psychological safety? It's having people who are regulated, who are ultimately secure and able to cooperate in that safe, trusting, regulated, responsible, accountable, kind, compassionate way. People who are honest, people who are transparent, people who are able to be responsible without, kind of hanging themselves in the process. So all of that to say, I went to that organization and did a couple of keynote events where we're working at scale here. So I'm teaching people the methodology of, this is how you actually help yourself. Because again, you want to help yourself. I'm a big believer that you want to learn the tools and techniques to become your own guru, so that you're not at 3 a.m. having to scramble around and talk to ChatGPT, because that's not going to help you, right? And you obviously can't call a therapist or coach at 3 a.m. So you want to learn the tools yourself, and you want to be. I mean, for a premium price, sure. I have to negotiate that with my husband, but I kind of have like 11 p.m. as my cutoff with my high profile clients. But anyhow, you want to learn this stuff, and so I'm a big fan of teaching people in companies. And often I will get the CEO coming to me and saying, "Help me, I want to scale, but I can't seem to scale because everyone's having drama, everyone's falling apart." And I hear this all the time, I feel like I'm babysitting my leadership team, right? I can't seem to actually do the deeper strategy work because I'm having to put out the little fires and deal with this person over there who didn't want to speak up in the meeting. And then they come find me in my office and they tell me what they really want to say in the meeting. And now I have to go and tell the rest of the people in the meeting, got this person over here who's got conflict with, it's exhausting. And as a founder, you don't really have the time or bandwidth to do that. Also, final thing I'll say on this, as a founder, statistically, you are more likely to be an avoidant attachment style. Because guess what? A lot of founders are extremely smart, extremely rational, extremely talented people. And they don't like emotional overwhelm. They don't like drama. They don't like volatility. They want to focus on their freaking work. That's why they're a founder. Yeah, you're focused.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of these founders have an avoidant attachment style, for better or for worse. But what that means is that you don't really have the skills to be the babysitter. You're not a babysitter by trade. Like, this isn't it's not your wheelhouse. So why would you waste your time and energy trying to navigate something that you're not inherently, like, it's not your skill set? So,
it's also not your responsibility, actually.
Totally.
Yeah. It's sorry, I think we got cut out a little bit there. I got you though. Yeah. So it's an interesting dynamic, because my compassion is both my greatest weakness and greatest strength. And so, like, it makes me I'm a compassionate leader, but I'm also a very deliberate and very intentional. And I don't fluff up language. And I just, we have a very, my own company, and my team is very in sync in that matter with each other, with us. We've cultivated an environment and a culture where everyone feels psychologically safe. It's constantly said, people feel heard and acknowledged. And it's very much like, okay, we just got to get things done, get shit done, but offer people the space and time to voice their opinions, voice their gripes or otherwise. Because I have found myself even in positions where I feel like, not now, but in the past, where I feel like I've had to babysit or something, and my compassion conflicts with my desires. I'm having this dissonance because I'm like, I don't want to I don't want to micromanage you. I don't want to check in all the time. You should be, optimal word, should be doing this and that. Um, and I need to be doing these things. And then it turns into when someone like yourself like talks to me, will say, that's not even what you're supposed to be doing. So it's, there are other things at play here. You know, is it a motivational factor? Is it a parameters factor? Is it a boundaries factor? Is it something about expectations or job descriptions or whatever? And that's how deep we tend to go in my program. We develop these like foundational communication strategies that speak to company culture, company values, you know, what the belief system is of said organization and how can those values be honored at every given touch point and interaction so that people ultimately feel the desired experience you want them to have.
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks to brand, right? That's like how people feel about you is your brand. And so as long as you can create a system and an operation that actually works through the lens of very specific values that connect to every experience across the board, so that employees and customers and passersby are having the same experiences, then you're creating an environment of truth and productivity and honesty and so on. And I just love how this, and I don't usually say I love how, that's not usually words that I say, but how your model plays so well into the same concept. And I, yes, you were already running out on time, but how do like how do you act? So let me ask you this: have you seen the work that you do with executives in the workspace, whether it's by mending their relationships with themselves or with their life partners or otherwise? um, have you seen that actually manifest in the company culture and create better environments on a whole, like through the entire company, for example?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And yeah, I 100%. And what I also have seen is, yeah, in big companies, you know, companies that are hundreds of thousands of people. Of course, I haven't, because it's a big project and I'm not there yet in terms of working with company. I mean, I have worked with companies at that scale, but I'm not dealing with the whole company at that point. That would probably be a full-time job for me, let's be honest. Um, but I have, and I just see it again with my LinkedIn, right? If I do a company training like this, and I hate the word training because it's not really a training, it's such a bland word, but my inbox blows up with people messaging me and thanking me and saying how this actually completely resonates. They've never come across anything like this and it's really helped them. And then the people continue working with me, right? That's ultimately kind of my biggest markers. You know, if I sign someone up for a 3-month program, but they're still working with me 2 years later and they don't seem to want to go, even though I'm like, you don't need me anymore. But they're like, no, I want to keep leveling up. And there's other arenas to go. And, you know, I took one executive, was really cool. So he worked with me and he hired me for himself and his company, which is typically what happens, right? They start working with me and then they want to bring me into the company. Another time he was just an employee, and we did so much incredible work. And again, at this point, I was like, I don't think you need anymore. I think you're really good. I think you're like, you're easy. Like you're great. But what we actually did was, at that point, because he was an employee, he was the chief operating officer, he actually quit. And then we started working together for him to build his own company. And because, you know, this guy's in his 50s, he doesn't want to start from scratch. This is more about acquisition. So what we've been working together is how to take him from, you know, a job where he's earning $500,000, he's COO, he's managing, you know, a big firm, to owning his own firm. And that company is now 9 million in revenue, and his salary is obviously exponentially higher. And this is his like retirement plan. And that's been really fascinating. And seeing can I how can what I've taught him and how can I come into that organization to create the most happy company with the lowest attrition rate, right, in a cost effective way, because people are genuinely fulfilled. So I see it kind of in the longevity, even though it's not about the longevity. If anything, I'm like, you know, get me in and get me out. It's more about the continuous growth that comes from this. Yeah, it's wonderfully rewarding stuff.
Yeah, I believe it, and I hear your passion, and I think that's so cool. And we're definitely gonna talk more.
I would love that.
Uh,
I was thinking, like, first of all, come to Vancouver and, like, let's grab a coffee. And second of all, would
yeah,
love to come back. And third of all, definitely just keep talking for sure.
yeah, absolutely. So if you had to leave our audience with a question to ask themselves to sort of prompt,
Yeah.
self-reflection, what would you say?
I would say thinking about your personal relationships and your professional, out of 10, how happy and fulfilled are you? So, out of 10, how happy and fulfilled are you in your personal romantic relationship? And how happy and fulfilled are you in your professional relationships out of 10? Right. And I would say if it's anything less than an 8.5, you've got work to do. Right. And if you turn around and say, well, I've worked with a leadership coach and I've done therapy. Well, the reason that hasn't got you to a 10 out of 10, which is quite frankly what you deserve to be at, is because there are going to be subconscious blocks that talking and traditional coaching are just not going to access, because you're only working with one tiny fraction of the brain, the conscious mind. And that's no one's fault. It's just the way that things are. So, it's kind of like going to, I know, a chiropractor and trying to get help with something that they're not trained to do. Just get someone else, get some other help. Yeah.
Thank you, Katarina. Tell our audience how they can find you if they want to reach out to you. Obviously,
Absolutely.
LinkedIn is
I was
one
going
of
to say, so yeah, LinkedIn is my bread and butter. Never thought I'd be such a fan of LinkedIn. It's such a great platform. LinkedIn, find me, Katarina Polonska, high performance relationship coach. I'm also on TikTok and Instagram, Katarina Polonska. You can find me there. Or my website, katarinapolonska.com. That's KATARINAPOLONSKA.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you here, honestly. And I will talk to you soon.
Amazing. Thank you.